As I talked with my friends, I made an astounding discovery. 80% of them were unhappy with their lives. I feel as though I've wasted my life and I'm halfway through it, they said. I don't know what my life is all about. Now, I was privileged to go to Yale, and we were standing on a summer evening in the middle of Yale's old campus, and the people that I was speaking with were privileged and highly educated and financially well off and in positions of power.
The whole system was invented around the world. There were no public systems of education really before the 19th century. They all came into being to meet the needs of industrialism. So the hierarchy is rooted on two ideas. Number one, that the most useful subjects for work are at the top. So you were probably steered benignly away from things at school when you were a kid, things you liked, on the grounds you would never get a job doing that. Is that right? Don't do music, you're not going to be a musician. Don't do art, you won't be an artist. Benign advice. Now, profoundly mistaken. The whole world is engulfed in a revolution. And the second is academic ability, which has really come to dominate our view of intelligence because the universities designed the system in their image. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. And I think we can't afford to go on that way.
I think it's extremely important to follow what God has put inside you and how God has uniquely created you. And this often hasn't been highlighted at schools or universities, but it's up to all of us to follow what we really feel God has put inside us to do on earth.
My new direction. I had a heart-to-heart talk with my mother, who asked me what it was I was most enthusiastic about. I responded, youth, math, and Jesus. Then, David, she said, pursue what it is that God has given you a passion for. I returned to college knowing exactly what I wanted to do, teach high school math. It's amazing what happens when you're in the center of God's will. Doors open, and people come alongside to encourage you.
Come on, a six-pack? Who needs a six-pack when you got the nose? Or a nose when you got the suit? Now you don't need a suit when you got the moves. Or moves when you got the fire. And who needs all that when you get the door? When you got the dough, the brain, that's right. Who needs some other thing when you got your thing? Now work on it.
It's real and Riley still going. Look at this, Kevin. It's a brilliant run from Messi. Can he go all the way? It's one of the great Copa del Rey final goals.
When I'm flying that airplane, I'm alive, and I'm part of that airplane, and that airplane's part of me. I'm absolutely in love with it, and I know I belong there. This is what I was born for.
We're just about out of time. I'm always aware that sitting at home are people who find it hard to relate to some guests, and there you are with your gold Rolls Royce, and you've made it, but you've also been down the bottom. What would you be saying to people who are really struggling with some pain and discouragement? We've got about a minute and a half. How would you advise them to approach their life now?
Or I would look at them and want to ask them some questions, 4 simple questions. The first one is, what age have you set yourself to reach your full potential that God might maximize your life? The second question is, could you tell me in 50 pages or more what your full potential is in every area of your life? Because this is a real thing. The third question is, if your full potential is 100%, what percentage rating would you give yourself right now? And the third and final one is, accepting the deficiency between the 2 scores, what plans are you going to make to take up the shortfall, and when?
There is no question in my mind that you cannot be a success in business if you don't love what you're doing.
I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love.
If he has a passion for his business, he'll get there. He can get knocked down 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and he will learn with each one. That he will learn, and he will find out what those mistakes are.
There are 2 different kinds of happiness, and one is the happiness that we derive from things like shopping, for example, from food, from money, and even from awards and achievements. So all those things that give us some kind of material pleasure, or the pleasure that we receive from succeeding in some small way. It gives us a boost. Then the other form of happiness that we look at, so the first form of happiness is something we call hedonic happiness, and the other form is called eudaimonic happiness, and that is happiness that's derived from things like meaning, from things like purpose, service, altruism, something beyond just your own self. And if you look at the research, the first type of pleasure, which is basically, you can think of it as rock and roll pleasure, it's so fun, right? But it has a very momentary, short-lived life. It comes and goes very quickly, and that leads us to want more. But if we look at eudaimonic happiness, that's actually the source of much more long-lasting well-being. You can even think of it as fulfillment. It's not just a momentary joy. It's something that lasts And I'll talk about that a little more. So that's just a little introduction to the topic of happiness, since we're talking about that today. So one of the reasons that I wrote the happiness track was that I attended Yale and Stanford, and I've worked there for many years. And I saw that alongside the brilliance that's there, and I know many Google employees who went to fantastic universities, along with the brilliance and along with the excitement, the innovation, and the amazing learning opportunities, also sometimes came misery. And what I mean by that is high levels of stress, of anxiety. In my first year at Stanford as a graduate student, I was pretty giddy, and I was learning from these legends. I mean, the people in the academics there are legends in their field. And yet, that first year I was there were 3 suicides on the campus. And I was thinking, wow, like we have this amazing opportunity. We're in this place that people dream of coming to. And yet, there's so much despair. And those were, of course, extreme cases. But what I saw was that there was a lot of feelings of stress and anxiety. In one of the classes, a student came up to Carol and said, I have to drop out. It goes against everything I've ever learned. And Carol said, what do you mean? And she said, well, my parents told me I have to be very, very successful. So when I asked them, how do I become very, very successful? They said, you have to work very, very hard. And she said, okay. And then she went back to them and said, how do I know when I'm working hard enough? And they said, when you're suffering. And then she went back to them and said, how do I know when I'm working hard enough? And they said, when you're suffering. Again, it's an extreme example, but it's one that we actually all buy into a little bit. It's one that we see, and it's one of the reasons we're seeing 50% burnout across industries. It doesn't matter if you work for a nonprofit, if you work for the medical field, we're seeing huge levels, and 50% is on the lower end of what we're seeing across industries. We're seeing that 80% of doctors' visits are due to stress.